All right. Well, the Indian rope trick is, of course, a fable as far as we know. But there are numerous accounts of it. And the one that is repeated most often is rather gruesome and gory. The Indian magician appears in a small village somewhere in India. He has a small group of villagers watching him. After doing some wonderful tricks, he throws a coil of rope up, a very thick rope up in the air. After a few attempts, it actually stays up in the air. He tugs at it to show that it really is tight. And then he sends a little Indian boy, who is his assistant, clambering up, and suddenly he disappears. He claps his hands, the magician claps his hands to get the boy to reappear, but he doesn't. So he gets more and more angry, and he takes off his coat and puts a large scimitar, a curved sword, into his mouth, looking very angry, climbs a rope, and he himself disappears. After some moments, there's a terrible shriek, and the parts of the body of this boy come falling down, legs, arms, and head and torso covered in blood. The magician reappears with a bloody sword. He claps his hands, the rope falls down, he collects the pieces and puts them in a sack and wipes his sword on the sack, leaving a blood stain. Suddenly he bursts into smiles, he claps his hands again, and the little boy comes running from behind a bush, waving his arms, as happy as anything. They then go and collect their money from the crowd, but before he does it, he tips the sack upside down, and rubble and stones and twigs fall out. Now the interesting part is, as he goes through the crowd, the only evidence that's left that anything has happened is a blood stain on the bag. Well, of course, we had many people who were out in the army in India coming back to this country and talking about all the wonderful tricks they had seen Indian magicians perform, but the one they'd always heard about was the Indian rope trick. You could never find first-hand reports of it, but it was always somebody who knew somebody else who had seen it. And the original version was quite simple, that the magician threw a rope up in the sky, it stayed there. He sent a little boy climbing up, and the boy disappeared. After a while, the boy would reappear and climb down the rope again, and then, with a clap of the hands, the rope would collapse. That is the original version. Well, I think any fable or any myth or legend will always last longer than true stories. It's been repeated and repeated and repeated, and other people besides myself have traveled India looking for a first-hand information about the Indian rope trick, and you can never find somebody who's actually witnessed it. But there are some people who have faked it. For instance, we were shown, the Magic Circle here in London was shown a 16mm black and white film of the Indian rope trick, and years later they exposed it as being a fake. We hadn't believed it in the first place, but it did look very convincing. There were 2 army officers who had faked it. We still have that film in our vaults. Of course, the Indian rope trick has been filmed at one point. There were 2 army officers who decided to film it, and it's very convincing. You see the rope staying up in midair, and you see the little boy climbing up it and disappearing. It was done on a 16mm black and white film in round about the 50s or 60s, and we still have that film in our archives. But of course, they admitted later on that it had been faked, which we suspected all along. Well, the Indian rope trick was filmed at one time. There were 2 army officers who decided to film it on a 16mm black and white film. It was brought back to England. It was shown to us. We thought it was fake, but we had no proof. A few years later, they did admit that they had faked it. And at that time, we had a monetary offer, which we didn't have to pay out at that time. I think the Indian rope trick has become sort of part of our legend that's been talked about and written about so many times that most people believe that it actually has been performed. And of course it's very intriguing, it's full of mysticism, and it's very puzzling, and therefore people will keep talking about it. Even if you prove to them that it hasn't been performed and nobody has ever actually seen it, people will still talk about it. The Magic Circle for many years had an occult committee. In fact, I was the chairman for something like 15 or 18 years until I renamed it, because occult is rather an old-fashioned term, and it's now called PIC, P-I-C, Paranormal Investigation Committee. When any kind of phenomena appears that the press and the media can't understand, they will call us in to try and investigate from a magician's point of view. And of course the Indian rope trick was so much talked about that they turned to us to find out if we had any solutions. We at that time offered £1,000, which was a lot of money in those days, for the performance of the Indian rope trick, but nobody ever took it up. Well, at one time, round about the 30s and 40s, everyone seemed to be talking and writing about the Indian rope trick. So it was quite natural that the media would come to us to find out if it was true or not. We, at that time, offered £1,000, which was a lot of money at the time, to have someone performance, but we never were challenged on it, and nobody's ever taken it up. The Magic Circle has always been interested in investigating strange phenomena and so-called paranormal and psychic phenomena. And of course we wanted to know if we could find somebody that we could reward with £1,000. Not an offer, not a challenge. Perhaps an offer, but not a challenge. The challenge would be, I bet you can't do it. Well, we have never said that. We would like someone to do it. We have an offer of £1,000 to be performed. The Magic Circle has always been consulted on any kind of paranormal or psychic phenomena, and of course people came to us and said, well, can you tell us if it's true or not? So we gave an offer of £1,000, not a challenge, just an offer to pay somebody £1,000 in order to perform it in front of us. Nobody's ever come forward. Now, I have to point out, of course, that lots of stage magicians have performed the Indian rope trick, but that doesn't count in our books because we wouldn't expect to have to pay a reward to a stage magician to perform any kind of illusion. We would expect him to do that. That's what magic is all about. But you can recreate things in film studios and on the stage that you couldn't do out in the open. And of course the essence of the Indian rope trick as described, it was performed out in the open air. Now we do have a famous magician in this country called Paul Daniels, who did perform it out in the open air but was on television. Now, I'm not saying that he cheated, but you can draw your own conclusions. He did a wonderful job, but it was done on a television program. The whole point of the Indian rope trick is done in the sand, in a little village, out in the open, no backdrops and no theatrical mechanics. Of course, the whole point about the Indian rope trick that is performed out in the open in a small village somewhere in India, and there is no possibility of using mechanical means as you would on the stage. So stage magicians can perform it, but not out in the open. Because of the myth of the Indian rope trick, magicians have cashed in on that and have advertised that they would be performing the Indian rope trick in their shows. But of course they are using theatrical techniques, magical techniques and illusions that we understand, but it does draw the crowd thinking they're going to see the legendary Indian rope trick performed on the stage. Of course, the mystique of the Indian rope trick would attract people, so magicians have used it on their posters and in their publicity material to draw people into the audience. But once they got there, they usually got a wonderful magical show, but the least part of it was the Indian rope trick, which was just a throwaway. The Indian rope trick has, of course, a long history, and therefore not only European and American magicians have tried to emulate it, but some of the Indian magicians over the years, mostly with dismal failures. But there was one recently who heard that the Magic Circle had offered £25,000. That offer is actually my personal offer for any paranormal phenomena and has nothing to do with the Magic Circle, but he misread that. Being the president of the Magic Circle, I assumed that was the offer from the Magic Circle. This misguided young man, youngish man anyway, in India, had an illusion built which cost him a lot of money. In English money, I think it was £1,700. He's a street magician, so he has no way of ever getting that sort of money back. It was filmed by a Canadian television company. We saw pictures of it, and it was a very poor attempt. Our own magician here in this country, Paul Daniels, was sorry for the man and offered to repay him his money in full because he thought it was a good attempt, but he never came back to him. So as far as we know, he's just lost out. There is a picture of his young son climbing a rope which looks rather limp and is about 5 foot tall instead of the usual 20 or 30 feet tall, and it looks very faked and lots of background material which makes it very confusing. The only offer that I know of for a serious performance of any kind of paranormal phenomena, physical phenomena, is my own offer of £25,000. This is legally lodged through one of our newspapers, the Daily Express, and it's been standing there since 1975 or something like that. I did raise it from 5,000 to 10,000 to 25. Now, this is a serious offer, not a challenge. People often make that mistake because I seriously would like to be able to pay it out. I'm not quite as foolish as I look because part of the contract would sign that person to me, so if somebody performed any kind of psychic phenomena, physical phenomena, they would automatically come under my jurisdiction for the publicity rights, television rights, book rights, and so on. So although people laugh at my offer and think I'm very foolish, I'm not quite as silly as I look. I was doing a world tour, and I went to India because it was convenient on the way to where I was going, to the Far East. And I had no intention when I left this country to do it. It wasn't pre-planned. I took a coach trip between Delhi and Agra, where the Taj Mahal is. And I was half asleep, and suddenly I opened my eyes on the coach, and I saw a village which I'd always pictured in my mind. That's the sort of setting for it. And I went back to Delhi and planned it. It cost me a tremendous lot of money. Well, in the Victorian days, of course, Britain was full of spiritualism and seances and table rappings, and people were fascinated with anything to do with the occult. So when people traveled to India and they found out that there were yogis and people who were performing what they considered true magic, the legends grew and grew, and they brought them back to this country, and they were always highly exaggerated. But I think they made such an impact that it's lasted to this day. The Indian rope trick seems to have been repeated over and over again in different parts of India. And it just traveled through the people who went to India. They brought it back. Perhaps some of them claimed that they had actually seen it, but it just grew and grew because so many different versions were reported. And if you read books of that time, they always mention the Indian rope trick. Somewhere along the line, somebody talks about the Indian rope trick, not necessarily claiming that they've seen it or experienced it, but they said that the mystery of the Indian rope trick was told to them by somebody that they trust implicitly. In the 30s and 70s, we'll start again. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, there were numerous reports in British newspapers of people who had apparently witnessed the Indian rope trick, and so it was quite natural for the media to come to us, the Magic Circle, and say, well, you can explain all these magical things, will you please tell us, is it true or not? And we decided to investigate. We didn't get any further than anyone else, but we did make that offer of £1,000, a lot of money in those days, in order to tempt somebody to come forward to perform it. Nothing ever happened. As far as I know, I am the only person in the world who has actually performed the Indian rope trick out in the open in India. Now, of course, I'm not claiming any kind of mysticism other than a great knowledge of theatrical stagecraft, mechanics, illusions, and so on. And I staged it purely on an impromptu impulse when I was in India because I saw a village that looked just like the one that had always been described. And outside this village, I set it up. At the time, it cost me a lot of money and a lot of extra work, but it was worth it because I now have in my records the story of the Indian rope trick performed by myself, dressed as an Indian, made up as an Indian, using a little Indian boy, and I have described exactly how it was done. There is no great secret, but it was mechanically and theatrically very well performed, but it would not have surpassed any kind of scrutiny or investigation by a serious body like the Magic Circle. As far as I know, I'm the only person who's ever actually performed the Indian rope trick out in the open in India. It was done on an impulse because when I was on a coach trip to the Agra, as far as I know, I'm the only person who's actually performed the Indian rope trick out in the open in India, done on a purely impromptu impulse. I happened to be in a coach traveling to Agra, where the Taj Mahal is, and out of the corner of my eye I saw a place that looked just like the fabled village where the Indian rope trick was always performed. I then went to some trouble and a lot of expense to set it up. I was very lucky because I was helped by a theatrical company from France who happened to be there, who enabled me to get a very large backdrop to obscure the sky between two trees, where we had some wires rigged up. We also had some so-called heavies of some Indians who were able to keep away some of the more curious Westerners and the press, so that they were at a distance. But I performed it to a small group of villagers who to this day would probably believe that they had witnessed the actual Indian rope trick. As far as I know, I'm the only person who's actually performed the Indian rope trick out in the open in India. It was done on an impulse because I saw a village which looked just like the one that you normally describe in the books, and attempted me to recreate it using, of course, my own magical know-how and theatrical knowledge. It was done in a clearing with a few villagers watching, very convincing. I was dressed as an Indian, made up as an Indian. I had a little Indian boy helping me. And perhaps I shouldn't tell you about his twin brother, who later on ran out from behind a bush. But it was a very convincing performance, and as far as I can see, the only one that was ever performed that way. The Magic Circle was started in 1905, so we're well over 90 years old. And it was started by a small group of magicians who wanted to meet and compare notes and perhaps just show each other some tricks. A very famous magician called David Berglas was their first president. He allowed them to meet under the stage of his theatre, St. George's Hall as it was called, and it grew from there, and of course it expanded so much they had to find new premises. And throughout these times we've had a number of headquarters. At the moment we're building an international center for the art of magic, which will also be our headquarters, and we are well more than halfway through getting our wish to come true.